Alrighty, well, the neighbors brought me my dinner. Nice spaghetti there, a peach cobbler, or peach crumble, and a nice salad. And anyway, I'm going to eat all that. I'm going to eat the spaghetti first. I just put some Parmesan cheese on it. Because as you know, spaghetti is not spaghetti without Parmesan cheese. Look, Rocky. Hey, you. Anyway, the previous video cut out on me before I finished telling the story. When I was a kid, I had an Aunt Teresa. She was my dad's sister. She's still around as far as I know. She's quite elderly now, though. Anyway, Aunt Teresa was an alcoholic. She was a heavy drinker. And she'd get drunk, and she'd start calling around to the family. Basically obscene phone calls is what it boiled down to. Because she'd get on there and she'd cuss you out. She'd tell you what a piece of crap if she thought you were. And how when she died, you weren't going to be allowed to come to her funeral. She's going to have security guards there to keep you out and all that business. Because you were such a horrible person. And anyway, she called my dad one time when I was a kid. I remember I was sitting at the table doing my homework. I was about 7 years old. And she called anyway. She called collect. Well, my dad accepted the charges. And then, of course, she lit into him. And you could hear through the phone, the F word and everything, just cussing away. Really laying into my dad, telling him that how much she hated him and all the rest of it. Anyway, he just hung up the phone on her and he went back into the living room. The phone was in the kitchen there on the wall over the kitchen table, This was back in the early 70s. Anyway, he just went back into the living room and he sat down in his lazy boy chair, in his black Naugahyde lazy boy chair, and continued to watch our big black and white console model television, the wooden cabinet and the vacuum tubes in it, and the clunky knobs and all that on it. Anyway, then the phone rings again. Well, this time she called direct. She didn't have the nerve to call collect the second time. And so my mom answered it. And we could you could hear Teresa because she'd just bellow through the phone. She yelled, my mom's name is Linda. She yelled, "Hello, Linda? Is my," and then it was COCK sucking brother there? And my mom just said, "Yes, he is." And she hung up. And I heard my dad from the living room say, "Well, you answered her question." Anyway, that's not the story I want to tell you. That's just a little side story anyway. It's kind of comical. The story I want to tell you about, though, is years and years later. This is after we were all growing up, all us kids, One of my half-sisters married a farmer, and she was living on the farm anyway. She's still there. She's still married to the guy, and she's still there. Anyway, but they had a neighbor down the road who was a good friend of theirs, and he'd come up to the house sometimes and visit them. And he was a real card, this guy. Like, this guy was very quick-witted, and he was just a real card. Like, it was, he'd come up with the best one-liners. Anyway, he's sitting up there in their house. This was in the early 1990s now. So we still had, everybody still had a landline back then and stuff. Anyway, my sister and her husband had left him alone in the kitchen. They had gone off to tend to something, I don't know what, but he was sitting there in the kitchen for a few minutes where they were off doing whatever they needed to do in the house. Maybe to check on the kids or something, I really don't know. But anyway, the phone rang. Well, the neighbor took it upon himself to answer it. Now, he had never dealt with Aunt Teresa before, but he answers the phone. And as soon as he picks up the receiver, Aunt Teresa yells into the phone, "Good day, you tramp," you know. And I guess my sister just walked back into the room as this interaction started to take place. So Teresa yells, "Good day, you tramp." And the neighbor got this look on his face, and he says, "I'm not a tramp," just like that. They said it was the funniest thing anyway. He just got this hurt look on his face, and he says, "I'm not a tramp," you know. Anyway, there was one time back in that era, she was calling me all the time. She spent one Saturday, she called me probably a dozen times. And I decided I was going to have a little fun with her. And so I answered the phone this one time. And I answered it by saying, "Good afternoon, St. Anthony's home for the occasionally all right." And she says, oh, I must have the wrong number. And she hung up, you know. Then she called me back and I answered it normal. And she says, "I just got a wrong number, some St. Anthony's home." Anyway, there was another time. This is when our grandpa was still alive. Grandpa Fournier, who of course was her father. No, she was my dad's sister. He was still alive. Grandma Fournier passed away in 1988, but Grandpa Fournier didn't pass away until 1996. So it was sometime in that era. Anyway, I was over at my grandpa's house. There were different people coming and going. I can't remember what was going on now, but there was something going on, and there was a bunch of us around for some reason, but I can't remember what it was now. Anyway, probably wouldn't remember it at all except for what happened. My Grandpa Fournier was very witty. He was another one who was very quick-witted, you know, good with the one-liners. Anyway, my dad was actually like that too. But Grandpa Fournier, of course, the phone was in the front hallway, which was at the other opposite end of the house from the kitchen. You had to walk through the kitchen and through the dining room to get into the front hallway where the phone was. It was there beside the stairs that went up to go upstairs in the house. And again, it was one of those old, you know, Bakelite phones that was bolted to the wall with the receiver hung on a chrome hook, and you had a dial and all that, you know. Anyway, Aunt Teresa was calling constantly, and she was on a rip, and so it was just profanity, a constant string of profanity coming out of her. Anyway, just constant stream of curse words, you know, every time she called. Well, somebody came into the house, and they asked my grandpa, they said, "Hey," "would it be okay if I use your telephone? I need to make a call." And he said, "Oh, no problem." He said, "Just, it's in the front hall there." It was somebody who wouldn't normally be around. I can't remember now all the details. I just remember this because it was so funny what my grandpa said. But it was somebody who came in who hadn't been in the house before anyway. Like I say, there was something going on, but I can't remember what it was now. Anyway, Grandpa Fournier said, "No problem. It's in the front hall there. Just help yourself." So the guy goes into the front hall, and you could hear him pick the receiver up off the hook. You know, hear him dialing. And then he said he hung up, and he come back out to the kitchen. He said, "Your telephone's not working." My grandpa looked up at him. He was sitting at the kitchen table. He looked up at the guy and he said, "It's not working." "Oh," he said, "must be full of profanity." He said, as if it was clogged like a toilet or something, you know. He said, "Must be full of profanity." Anyway, just some stories I remember, kind of clever stories anyway. You know, my grandpa was really good with the one-liners. And so was my dad. They were both pretty good that way, you know. My dad passed away in 1988 as well. just a couple of weeks after Grandma died. And he was only 51 when he passed away. But anyway, for just a couple of weeks after his mother, he passed away. But anyway, that's just some comical stories for you anyway. I'm really enjoying this spaghetti. This is really good. My teeth are hurting, so I'm having some trouble chewing. But even with that, I'm still really enjoying this spaghetti. It's excellent. It's very good. It's a really nice night, you know, beautiful sunset and everything. I want to eat this. I think what I want to do after I eat this is take a quick drive back out. I'm going to try out to the swimming hole where I went last night and the night before and try to get a video out there because I think it's going to be a beautiful sunset tonight. So that's what I'm hoping to do. It's not really all that far away. And so that's what I'm hoping to do anyway. I'll have to go into town and I'll have to go through the edge of town and then back up another highway and stuff. But it really isn't that long a drive, really. It's maybe I don't know, maybe a 15-minute drive at the most. So I may do that. Anyway, I'm going to shut this down now. Rocky does not like that bandage. All right, we'll see y'all later.